Hello and welcome back to Living Creative with Pixie Princess. I'm Jaydell and today we're back in the kitchen making a delicious recipe using sausage and cabbage and potatoes. It's a really wonderful one-pot meal, so I hope you will stay tuned and learn how we make this. I'm so glad you stayed tuned to cook this with me. So let's get started and I'll tell you what we need. The first ingredient, and I'm going to go ahead and get these started cooking because they take the longest to cook. This was about six, about medium red potatoes. You can use any potato you want. You just need an abundant size, like depending on how many people you're feeding. I cooked about six because there's 3 people that's going to eat this, so that equivalent's about two potatoes a person. So I didn't peel them. I did cut the eyes off and make sure they were nice and clean. But I like to keep the peeling on my potatoes because it adds a lot of flavor and it keeps the nutrition in the potato. So we're going to season these. And for seasoning, I used about a tablespoon of cornmeal. And I use the cornmeal because it helps give a crust to the potatoes and it helps them to brown. So I have about a tablespoon of cornmeal, a teaspoon of Himalaya pink salt. You can use regular table salt, sea salt, whatever you prefer, but I like the pink Himalaya. I used a teaspoon of black pepper, a teaspoon of paprika, and I used about a tablespoon of the ranch dressing powder in here to give it some extra flavor. So we're going to coat our potatoes with our seasonings here. So I'm just going to give these a good stir. The potatoes take the longest to cook, but I am going to go ahead and add the garlic because it's bitter if it's not cooked thoroughly. So I want it to cook with the potatoes. I'm just going to make sure I coat this, and when you add it to the pan, you can stir it and give it another good stir to make sure they're good and coated. So I'm going to use about a teaspoon of this minced garlic. You can mince your own garlic. That's perfectly fine. I know a lot of you have gardens and you have that, but this is just easy. It's convenient and it adds a lot of flavor. But first, we need to coat our pan with some olive oil. I love to use olive oil. You can use canola, vegetable, whatever you have on hand. I don't recommend butter because this cooks a long time and the butter can burn. Olive oil can too if you're not careful. So we're going to turn our heat on about a medium heat. We don't want it too high, but we don't want it too low that it's not going to cook. I have had my pan heating already, so this should sizzle when I pour the olive oil in. Not quite. But I can tell it is hot. So I'm just going to make sure that gets well distributed in the pan. So, I mean, you don't want a ton of oil because you don't want this to be greasy, but you want it enough to cook everything and get everything nice and brown. We are going to be adding a lot of ingredients, so enough to do that. And I'll just kind of eyeball that. So I'm just using a regular table eating spoon, just kind of eyeballing it about that much into the pan. There's that sizzle. So I'm going to stir that garlic around in the pan right here. I'm going to kind of toss these around a little bit as I add them. I want to make sure all those seasonings, and truth be told, I probably should have put these in a larger bowl so that I could have stirred them well. Like they say, hindsight 2020. Alright, so I'm going to give these a good stir, coat them in the oil, and these need to cook a little bit before we start adding our other ingredients. So let me get these stirred, and then we'll cook these for about 2 minutes or so. I just want to make sure they're good and coated in the seasonings and in the oil and the minced garlic that I just put in there. And then while that's cooking, okay, you don't want them to burn, but you want them to cook very thoroughly. They want to be tender and a little crispy and brown on the outside. So for about 2 minutes. So let me tell you the other ingredients that we're going to be using while we're cooking this. We chopped up a whole onion and a whole bell pepper. You need at least about a cup to give it some good flavor. You can use the whole onion, you can use the whole bell pepper. If you have something else you may be using this for later, just, put a little bit of it in here, about half of it, about a cup. And we're just going to add this when our potatoes start to get tender. I'm going to keep these kind of stirred, but not, they need to cook a little while unstirred too. All right, now we're cooking. Okay, so we've got our onions and our bell pepper that we're going to add to this. And then we have a smoked sausage that we cut up in slices. You can slice it or dice it. There are many different varieties of smoked sausage. This is just a regular plain smoked sausage. There are some that have a lot of heat to it. We have used one that has jalapeno, some that has onion. There's a lot of flavorful sausages. I think this was on sale. This is why we bought this one. But just either slice it or dice it up, however you want it, kind of depending on who you'll be serving this to. So this is already pre-cooked, so adding it to this recipe, we're just warming it up and getting it a little brown. And then lastly, because it takes the least amount to cook, we're going to add our cabbage. Now you can chop your own cabbage up, and I have most definitely done that. It's a little time consuming, so for the sake of this video and to save a little time, I'm using a bag of coleslaw mix. It does have carrots in it, but I think the carrots will be fine. It'll give it some flavor, some texture, and some color. But by all means, you can chop up a cabbage and use it in this recipe. But you can also, for convenience, buy it already shredded. You can buy the one that doesn't have carrots in it. The angel hair, I think, might disintegrate just a little bit, so I would get a little thicker cut of the cabbage than the angel hair. But by all means, whatever you prefer. Just going to stir these a little bit. And the eye that I'm using doesn't consistently heat like I like. But I just want you to see what we're doing. So I'm just going to let these potatoes cook for a little while, and then I'll be back and we'll add our other ingredients. So stay tuned. Okay, so we've had our potatoes cooking about 15-20 minutes, and I put a lid on it. I don't have a lid that fits this pan, so this is like a restaurant style pan, so I don't have a lid. It didn't come with a lid. So I just put a cookie sheet over it to keep the heat in. So you can improvise in the kitchen. So just, make sure you're using safety when you're using different tools in the kitchen. Okay, these should be about done. They're very nice and brown. What you want is, you want to be able to stick a fork in, and you want it to mash a little. So that's good. They're going to cook a little bit longer. And I'm going to add just a little more oil before I put my onions and peppers in here. Just a little bit. About like so. Give it a nice stir. And you see how nice and brown these potatoes are? Okay, so I'm going to add my onions and peppers. I may or may not use this whole thing. And you want to cook this until your onions are kind of translucent. Okay, I think that's about all I'm going to put. I'm going to use these and make an omelet for breakfast in the morning. That sounds pretty delicious to me. Now, if you want to make this recipe other than just on the stovetop, you have some options. And I'm going to put this lid back on and let this cook at least about 5 minutes or so. It's not really hot anymore. But sometimes you have to improvise and use what you have. So if you wanted to like bake this in the oven, what you would do is saute your onions and your bell pepper and your garlic, and then just mix everything in a baking dish and put it in the oven, probably 30 to 40 minutes on about 350 or 425, something like that. I would say 425. That's usually what I roast potatoes on. And then let them cook 30 to 40 minutes till the potatoes are nice and golden and soft. And then everything else is cooked and tender. You could also use, if you have an Instant Pot, you know, the electric pressure cooker. We have one that's not the Instant Pot. That's a brand name. We do have a electric pressure cooker pot, which works like an Instant Pot. So if you have Instant Pot recipes and you have a pressure cooker that's electric, you can use that recipe in there. So you could also, those pots have a saute choice. So you would saute your onions and your peppers in the Instant Pot or the pressure cooker, and then once those are translucent, you would add all your other ingredients. And you want to add just a little bit of liquid in there, not a lot, because the cabbage has liquid in it, but you have to have enough to get it up to steam. So you can mix it all together. I would say no more than about a quarter of a cup of water in there, or some broth if you prefer. You know, put it on seal, turn it on, probably about 10 to 15 minutes, and it should be ready. And another option would be to use your slow cooker. So if you have a crock pot or a slow cooker, you can saute your onions and peppers on the stove, get them all tender and translucent, and then add everything in the crock pot. Let it cook 4 to 6 hours in the crock pot. So those are just options on cooking this recipe. They're all going to turn out delicious and wonderful. This is the kind of, you know, you have to stay with it and watch it. So, you know, like I don't have a lid for this pot, so I improvised and used a cookie sheet to cover it and keep the heat inside. I don't want, you know, too much heat on here. The potatoes are nearly done. They're going to be cooking a little bit longer, but they're just close enough that when everything else cooks, they're going to be good and ready. So, don't know if that's been about 5 minutes or so. I'm going to check them. So I'm going to get my oven mitts so I don't burn myself. Always remember safety first in the kitchen. Okay, they're starting to look really good. So I'm going to give them a stir. I want the onions to get a little dunner before I add my other ingredients. But I think this is the right amount of onions. If you wanted to add some mushrooms, you could do that too. I think that would be wonderful in this. I would add it about the same time you add your cabbage, because mushrooms don't take long to cook. Okay, we're going to let this cook for about another 5 minutes, and then we'll come back and finish the rest of our dish. Okay, so we've had this cooking covered for about 5 minutes. So it gave the potatoes a little more time to cook, and the onions look very nice and tender, as well as the bell pepper. So I'm going to kind of scoot these over to the side so I can brown the sausage a little bit. So I'm just going to add that. The sausage is already cooked, so all we're doing is heating it up and letting it brown just a little bit. Now these potatoes, onions, and peppers, if you just wanted to do this as a side dish, you know, you could make some pinto beans and have this on the side with some cornbread, just a nice country meal for you know, a meatless night. That would be delicious. You know, add some sliced tomato on the side, you know, it'd be wonderful. But we're going to add the sausage and the cornbread. So I'm going to let this cook a little bit, just to get it nice and heated. I would add a little more oil, but I don't want to add any more. You know, I don't want it to be greasy. I don't want to have to put it on paper towels before we eat it. And that's one reason I like to use olive oil, because it's kind of a healthier alternative. It's been used for years. But if you don't have olive oil, I know it can be a little more expensive. You can use just regular vegetable oil. You could use butter, but butter doesn't have the longevity to cook for a long time. It's really great for baking, or just, you know, a quick, you know, cooking an egg or something like that, or a grilled cheese. But when you've got to cook something for a very long time. Now you can add a little butter in here for flavor, but I wouldn't count on it for longevity to cook. This is sounding good, so I'm just going to kind of mix it all together now. And it's going to heat up some more. So now we're ready to add our cabbage. So I already have my package with the coleslaw mix. So I'm just going to pour that in. I'm going to give it a good stir. And I think I'm going to add about a 1/4 cup of water. And then I'm going to put the lid on it and let it cook for another 5 minutes or so. I'm going to check it, and if it looks tender and done, then we're going to go with that. But so let me get some water in here. I'm going to let it cook covered for about another 5 minutes, and then we'll come back. Okay, so we've had this cooking covered for about 5 minutes, and it looks beautiful. Now test your cabbage to see if it's tender enough for your liking. If it's not, you can cook it a little more. If you want your sausages to cook a little longer, you certainly can do that. But mine look very tasty. This is perfect for us. We like still a little crunch to our cabbage, so this is perfect. So I'm going to turn my heat off. Now if you want to add a little hot sauce and stir it in, some pepper sauce, anything like that, you certainly can. A little more salt and pepper if you think it needs it, or you can just slap the person eating it salt and pepper their own, or add whatever hot sauce they want to their individual plate or bowl. Now like I said, you can serve this with some cornbread or biscuits, or just on its own. So just let me know how you like this recipe. Like I said, you don't have to cook it on the stovetop. This is probably the longest method, cooking it on the stove, but you can also bake it in the oven. Just make sure you saute your onions and peppers, and you might want to brown your sausage a little bit. You can cook it in an Instant Pot or a slow cooker, just however you choose. But if you make this recipe, I'd love to hear from you. If you make a similar recipe, what you add, what you don't add, I would love to hear from you on that. If you have questions, please ask them in the comments below, or you can send me an email. I'll be happy to answer any questions that I can for you. So for now, this is going to do it for this video. So until the next one, I hope God blesses you richly and that you have a wonderful day. Bye-bye.